This man is incredibly miserable. His village was massacred overnight. His wife was killed. His own son died before his eyes. His savior was hanged. He almost got eaten by a bear. And he had to hide inside a horse's belly to avoid the wind and snow, when everything was falling apart. He struggled to survive in despair because only by staying alive could he seek revenge. This is a very classic film. And the protagonist is truly tragic. The movie is The Revenant. The film is set in the 19th century. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Hugh Glass, a guide for a fur trading expedition, which is a nightmare for beavers. To satisfy the upper class's pursuit of fashion, beavers became the most sought-after species in the fur trade. As a result, fur trading expeditions emerged to hunt beaver pelts. Following a gunshot from Glass during a hunt, the Ree people began to chase and plunder the fur traders. When Glass returned, the fur traders had suffered severe casualties. Even though they all carried flintlock rifles, they couldn't withstand the overwhelming number of Ree people. The fur trading team quickly suffered heavy losses, with only 12 men escaping onto a small boat, taking away a small portion of beaver pelts. Thick smoke billowed through the forest, crows circled in the sky, and the scent of death permeated the entire area. These crows came to announce the deaths. The Ree people scavenged items from the hunters' corpses, while Elk Dog searched for his daughter. Not seeing any trace of her, he ordered his people to take all the pelts to trade with the French and continued to search for his daughter. The surviving hunters discussed how to evade the Ree people's pursuit. Captain Henry naturally sought the guide's advice. Glass suggested abandoning the boat and returning to the camp on foot. However, Fitzgerald disagreed. Walking would take several more weeks, and he didn't trust hiding the pelts in the woods. When would he get his reward? Captain Henry directly refuted his opinion. Glass understood this area. No one had more authority than him. His job was to escort the fur traders safely home. If they couldn't bring back the pelts, wouldn't this trip be in vain? Fitzgerald, who is both frustrated and angry, begins to mock Glass, saying that he has heard that Glass had lived with the Pawnee and killed a white officer and one of his own men in order to save Hawk, who was beside him. Captain Henry immediately scolded Fitzgerald, stopping the increasingly heated argument. Glass, meanwhile, was scolding Hawk on the side, telling him not to interfere. Hawk was his child with a Pawnee woman. However, not everyone trusted Glass's suggestion. 2 members of the team didn't abandon the boat. Instead, they rowed it toward the camp. This made Fitzgerald complain about Glass again, saying he should have been on that boat. The next day, the 2 runaway hunters were killed by the Ree people on their way, and their scalps were taken. Glass chose to cross a desolate area to return to the camp, believing the Ree people wouldn't hunt there, making it relatively safer. While the hunters were resting, Glass went hunting alone in the forest. He happened to encounter 2 bear cubs and couldn't resist raising his gun. But then he heard an animal's roar from behind. A huge North American grizzly bear began tearing into Glass, its sharp claws ripping open his back. In the face of the powerful grizzly, Glass was tossed around like a child. He had no strength left, and his vision began to blur. He could only lie motionless on the ground, pretending to be dead. The bear's saliva dripped onto his face, and it pressed its paw on his head. Glass endured the pain, not daring to make a sound. It seemed to be checking if the person below still had any fight left in him. The bear even stepped on him a couple of times. Feeling that this human was completely still, the bear ran back to check on its cubs upon hearing their calls. Glass seized the opportunity to pick up his flintlock rifle and fired at the approaching bear. Because the fur trading team used flintlock shotguns for hunting beavers and similar animals, the gun's power was negligible against the bear. The bear resumed its attack on Glass. It not only bit his throat but also clawed his body until it was covered in blood. However, the bullet's impact gradually took effect, and the bear became dizzy. As it pounced on Glass again, he drew his knife and, seizing the moment, stabbed the bear in the neck. Man and bear tumbled down the hill, with Glass pinned underneath the bear. After a while, the hunters found Glass and hurriedly pushed the bear off him. Everyone was astonished by Glass's incredible fighting ability, surviving a solo fight with a grizzly bear. This scene demonstrated Glass's calm and meticulous nature. Faced with the bear's assault, he didn't retaliate blindly. He waited until the bear was close before firing, and only drew his knife when the bear was upon him. After Bridger set Glass's fractured bones, the pain caused Glass to pass out immediately. Captain Henry and the doctor seized the opportunity to treat Glass's wounds, stitching up the gashes on his back and the tear in his throat. The Ree people, who had stolen the furs, also found the French hunters to trade. They only needed horses and guns. Initially, the French hunters refused to trade horses, stating that the furs already bore the American hunters' brand, trying to fool Elk Dog into selling the stolen furs at a low price. Elk Dog, however, retorted by asking who the real thieves were. "You have stolen everything from us, our land, our animals. 2 white men snuck into our tribe and took my daughter. The only reason I'm trading furs with you is for our reputation." I need your horses and guns to find my daughter. Elk Dog didn't know that it was actually the French hunters who had taken his daughter. The conflict between the Ree and the fur trapping team was instigated by the French hunters, who framed the trappers for the kidnapping of Elk Dog's daughter, allowing the French to profit from buying the stolen furs cheaply. In that era, American hunters genuinely made their living through hunting, even on the Ree's territory. They dared not be too arrogant. Eventually, they agreed to Elk Dog's demands and traded 5 horses. As night deepened, the fur trapping team huddled around the campfire for warmth. Bridger placed a string of bear claws into Glass's backpack. Bear claws symbolize courage and the ability to face adversity, as well as peace and health. Bridger hoped Glass could survive. The next day, the fur trapping team continued their journey. Glass lay on a stretcher, eyes vacant and motionless. Suddenly, Captain Henry ordered a cloth to be placed over Glass's eyes because the path ahead was mostly mountainous, and carrying Glass would significantly slow them down. Fitzgerald persistently urged Captain Henry to end Glass's suffering quickly, arguing that he wouldn't survive much longer anyway. Captain Henry ultimately decided to end Glass's misery. Hawk pleaded with Captain Henry not to shoot, to spare his father. In the end, Captain Henry couldn't bring himself to do it. He offered $70 for 2 people to stay behind and accompany Glass in his final moments. Bridger agreed without hesitation, saying he would stay even without the money if Captain Henry permitted it. Apart from Hawk, Bridger was the only one who genuinely hoped for Glass's survival. However, no one else volunteered. Fearing for their lives if the Ree caught up to them, Captain Henry immediately raised the reward to $100. Both Hawk and Bridger offered their shares of the payment, prompting Fitzgerald, who was greedy for money, to agree. He promised to take care of Glass until the end and give him a proper burial, but Fitzgerald did nothing except dig a grave for Glass. It was Hawk and Bridger who tended to Glass, while Fitzgerald waited in the woods for Glass to die. Seeing Fitzgerald's half-bald head, Bridger asked about it. Fitzgerald recounted his story, explaining that the Ree had scalped him. Native Americans would scalp their enemies as a mark of a warrior's honor. The sound of the knife scraping his skull and the Ree's mocking laughter still haunted Fitzgerald, making him terrified of being pursued by the Ree. He just wanted to leave quickly. He sent Bridger to fetch some water, and as Bridger was carving a design onto his canteen, it turned out to be a symbol of the Whirlpool clan. Just when Bridger and Hawk were away, Fitzgerald started coaxing Glass to die quickly, saying that then he could take his son and catch up with the main group. Otherwise all 3 of them would end up dead. He even offered to help hasten Glass's death, suggesting that if Glass agreed, he should just blink. Glass didn't want to die, but the evil in Fitzgerald's suggestion lay in the fact that no one can avoid blinking. When Glass couldn't help but blink, Fitzgerald immediately tied him up and covered his nose and mouth, trying to suffocate him. Luckily, Hawk returned in time and knocked Fitzgerald down with the butt of his gun, shouting for Bridger to come back and help. At that moment, Bridger was filling a canteen in the river and couldn't hear Hawk's calls over the sound of the water. Fearing Hawk's cries would attract the Ree, Fitzgerald killed Hawk without hesitation and hid his body. Glass witnessed the entire scene but could do nothing as he watched his son being brutally murdered by Fitzgerald. When Bridger returned, everything seemed peaceful, as if nothing had happened. Glass wanted to speak, but no sound came from his throat. Perhaps he didn't dare tell Bridger, fearing both of them would be silenced since Bridger had expressed deep hatred toward Fitzgerald while searching for Hawk. Early the next morning, Fitzgerald suddenly woke Bridger, lying that the Ree were coming and they needed to leave immediately. After packing up, Bridger didn't want to leave Glass behind. Fitzgerald forcibly dragged Glass into the grave and started to bury him with dirt. After a few shovelfuls, he didn't want to do the work anymore and left the rest to Bridger. "Hurry up and shoot him. We need to go," he said, but Glass was still alive, and Bridger couldn't bring himself to kill him. Instead, he placed the canteen on Glass's body and abandoned him in his plight, choosing his own safety and following Fitzgerald. After an unknown period, Glass finally gathered the strength to crawl out of the grave. He grabbed a handful of soil stained with his son's blood, his spirit shattered. In the cold snow, he finally crawled to his son's side and lay down quietly. Glass was an American who had been captured by the Pawnee tribe. However, through luck and his exceptional skills, he gradually made a name for himself within the tribe. Elk Dog took him in and even gave his only daughter to Glass in marriage. The couple had a child together. One day, the tribe was massacred by colonial forces, and his wife was killed. To save his son, Glass killed the lieutenant responsible. From that point on, Hawk was his only hope and the last memory of his wife. But now, everything was gone. All that was left was a cold corpse in front of him. He took whatever usable items he could find and began searching for food, knowing that he had to survive to avenge his family and kill Fitzgerald. He smashed the bones of dead animals to extract the marrow. Though it was cold and hard to swallow, he had to eat to regain his strength. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald and Bridger were trying to catch up with the main group. However, Fitzgerald's words revealed a flaw in his story, making Bridger realize he had been deceived into abandoning Glass and Hawk. What could he do now? He couldn't turn back to find Glass, who might already be dead. He had no choice but to continue forward with Fitzgerald. Little did he know, Glass was still alive, albeit in a dire state. Every time he drank water, he coughed up bloody water. The water he drank seeped out through the wound in his throat. If he didn't treat it, he would die of dehydration. Glass smeared gunpowder on his throat wound, lit some dry grass with flint, and then cauterized the wound. The pain made him pass out instantly. Crows perched in the trees stared intently at Glass, waiting for him to die so they could feast on him. Instead, they became Glass's dinner. To him, anything that could be put in his mouth was food. Seeing a deer swimming in the river, he raised a branch and shot at it. The deer continued swimming leisurely, and he had to settle for chewing tasteless dry leaves. The Ree suddenly appeared by the river. Glass hurriedly hid in the water to avoid being seen, but he was still discovered. He swam downstream, diving underwater to avoid arrows. The swift current carried him farther away, eventually saving him as he floated to a distant shore. Exhausted and hungry, the long drift left him utterly spent. He collapsed by the riverbank and fell into a deep sleep. Upon waking, Glass built a campfire, warming his exhausted body. Using stones, he trapped some fish and ate delicious sashimi, the sense of fullness making him forget he could have cooked the fish over the fire. With renewed strength, Glass climbed to the mountaintop and saw a herd of buffalo frantically running in different directions, seemingly fleeing. Among them were wolves, who had isolated and surrounded a lone buffalo. The rest of the herd didn't protect it but instead fled, leaving it defenseless. At that moment, the lone buffalo seemed as isolated as Glass, and also reminiscent of the disunited Native Americans who struggled to resist the colonists. Waking again, Glass saw a Native American driving away the wolves with a campfire and then enjoying a buffalo feast alone. Glass hurried over, raising his hands and lying on the ground in submission, unable to speak loudly, gesturing desperately that he was starving and needed food. Seeing his weakness, the Native American lowered his bow and offered him a large piece of buffalo liver. Glass took a big bite without hesitation. The raw taste almost made him vomit, but survival instincts forced him to keep eating despite the awful taste. Why eat raw food instead of cooking it, when eating raw fish? It was sheer hunger. Eating raw liver might have been to gain the Native American's trust. Full and exhausted, Glass fell into a deep sleep. The Native American undressed him, revealing his scarred back. Given Glass's vigilance, he should have reacted to being touched but pretended to wake up, likely to lower the man's guard. Glass handed over the bear claw pendant Bridger had given him, explaining in a raspy voice that a grizzly bear had injured him. His comrades had then killed his child and left him to die. This story resonated with the Native American, who revealed he was Pawnee, and his family had been killed by the Sioux. Although all Native Americans, they weren't united and even fought each other. He was now seeking other Pawnee people. Hickok, the Native American, accepted Glass and rode south with him on a spotted horse. Along the way, they stuck out their tongues to catch snowflakes, laughing like carefree children, enjoying pure moments of human joy. These two profoundly lonely and sorrowful individuals had accepted their reality, finding solace in simple pleasures. A severe snowstorm hit, causing Glass's wounds to fester, and he collapsed again. Hickok cut down tree branches to build a shelter, treating Glass's wounds, and lit a fire outside. He heated stones and placed them in the tent, covering them with snow to create steam and warmth for Glass. In a delirious state, Glass dreamed of arriving at an abandoned church, where his son Hawk slowly approached him. They embraced tightly, but Glass felt no warmth. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was hugging a tree. The bell continued to chime, and the ruins of the church were far from a warm haven. The Creator had transformed into a Grim Reaper. Glass couldn't go to see his son yet. He had accepted the Reaper's call to avenge his son, to wield the Reaper's scythe. Glass tenaciously survived. The snowstorm had ceased, and the forest was teeming with life again. But when he left his shelter and entered a grove, he discovered Hickok hanging from a tree, a sign attached to his body. Not far away, a group of French hunters were celebrating wildly. Glass also spotted Hickok's spotted horse. He intended to steal the horse quietly, but the hunter's leader dragged a woman over to assault her. Coincidentally, this woman was Elk Dog's daughter from the Ree tribe. It was the French who had captured her and blamed the American hunters, thus inciting the Ree to attack the trapping party. The two were too close for Glass to simply take the horse. He had to hold a gun to the hunter, rescuing Elk Dog's daughter, then releasing all the horses and riding off on the spotted horse. Elk Dog's daughter seized the opportunity to flee in another direction. In his haste, Glass left behind the canteen Bridger had given him. Meanwhile, Bridger and Fitzgerald had returned to the camp. Fitzgerald brazenly boasted about how responsibly he had cared for Glass until he was buried. Captain Henry gave him the promised reward. Bridger, feeling guilty, refused the money and walked out. He stared out the window, uncertain of Captain Henry's thoughts, perhaps also finding solace in the money. That night, they discussed how to retrieve the furs. Captain Henry planned to wait for the military to arrive, giving them enough strength to strike back. Early the next morning, Glass encountered the Ree again. Fortunately, His vigilance kept him from being surrounded, but his horse was shot in the rump, causing both horse and rider to fall off a cliff. Remarkably, Glass survived unscathed while the horse perished. The snowstorm grew fiercer. Fearing he wouldn't survive the cold, he gutted the horse, removed his clothes, get in the horse's belly to escape the cold. The horse's body temperature was higher than a human's, and it was still warm from its recent death. Glass smartly removed his clothes to use both his and the horse's body heat to preserve his own temperature and survive. After another day, snow had blanketed the horse's body. Glass emerged from the horse's carcass unscathed. He resumed his journey across the desolate, snowy expanse. At night, he found warmth in crevices and carved a message into a snow wall. Fitzgerald killed my son. This constant reminder of his need for revenge became his driving force for survival. With enough determination, he believed he could overcome any obstacle. A French hunter suddenly arrived at the camp. His entire team had been killed, leaving him as the sole survivor. He sought food from Captain Henry, but Captain Henry agreed only to trade for money. The hunter had no choice but to take out the few items he had. Bridger's eyes suddenly lit up. Wasn't that canteen the one he had left with Glass? But Glass should be on the brink of death. Could it be that his son Hawk had taken the canteen and was trying to reach the camp? After questioning the hunter about where he found the canteen, Captain Henry immediately prepared horses and supplies, offering a reward of $10 per person to search for Hawk. They didn't find Hawk, but they did find Glass. At that moment, Captain Henry and Bridger were in disbelief. How was this man still alive? It was clear that Fitzgerald had lied. Captain Henry hurried back to the camp to capture Fitzgerald, but he had already fled, taking all of Captain Henry's money with him. Fitzgerald couldn't wait for the army to return to collect the furs. He planned to go to Texas to buy land and retire comfortably. Captain Henry was furious and took his anger out on Bridger, accusing him of treason and locking him in a cage to await trial. Glass did not plead for Bridger, merely casting a cold glance back. However, when talking to Captain Henry, he explained that Bridger had been deceived and was just following orders. He hadn't witnessed Fitzgerald killing his son. Glass wanted to pursue and kill his enemy immediately, but Captain Henry insisted that he rest and recover while he went after Fitzgerald. Glass disagreed, stating that without him, Captain Henry wouldn't be able to catch the cunning Fitzgerald. He had already set a trap for Fitzgerald. Seeing Glass's determined eyes, Captain Henry reluctantly agreed. The next day, they set out together to hunt down Fitzgerald. Why just the two of them? Previously, Captain Henry had taken a group and offered a $10 reward per person to search for Hawk. Now, he had no money left, so he could only go alone. It wasn't just for Glass. Captain Henry also wanted to eliminate the traitor who had stolen his money. Using his experience, Glass began tracking Fitzgerald. During their night's rest, Captain Henry asked Glass, "Did you really kill an officer?" Glass replied, "I only killed someone who wanted to kill my son." This indeed reflected Captain Henry's suspicion. He wanted to know why Glass had killed one of his own, questioning if Glass had truly rebelled against the system. Glass's straightforward answer was, "I just wanted to protect my family." Captain Henry, a capitalist and a shrewd hunter, had initially decided to kill Glass after he was injured to avoid hindering the team's progress. He calculated costs and casualties, following rules to maintain his position, but after losing his money, his anger intensified. With his interests harmed, he no longer adhered to any system. However, if Glass truly rebelled against the system, once they caught up with Fitzgerald, it might only be Captain Henry returning. When they spotted Fitzgerald's tracks, Glass suggested Captain Henry search the clearing while he scouted the woods. Sure enough, Captain Henry soon saw Fitzgerald. Being a second too slow to draw his gun, he was killed by Fitzgerald. Hearing the gunshot, Glass rushed toward the sound and found Captain Henry's body scalped. Knowing Fitzgerald was nearby, Glass cut some branches, then rode his horse, dragging Captain Henry's body, continuing toward the open snowy field. Another gunshot rang out, and the ambushed Fitzgerald hit the figure on horseback ahead. He used his gun to part the coat, revealing a branch. Glass had propped up Captain Henry's corpse on the horse, riding behind it himself. Fitzgerald, now wounded, fled into the woods with Glass in hot pursuit. Roaring with anger, the two finally confronted each other in the forest, exchanging gunfire without hitting their mark, and soon engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Ultimately, Fitzgerald was overpowered by Glass, who pinned him to the ground. Just as Glass was about to kill his enemy, he saw the Ree people on the other side of the river. He remembered Hickok's words, realizing that true justice should be left to a higher power. Glass chose to let God judge the sinner rather than become a vengeful savage. He threw Fitzgerald into the river, where he floated towards the Ree. Elk Dog did not disappoint him. He killed Fitzgerald and scalped him. The Ree people bypassed Glass, sparing his life because he had saved Elk Dog's daughter, repaying the favor. The film nears its end here. Fitzgerald scalped Captain Henry because he didn't know Glass was alive. He assumed Captain Henry was pursuing him for money, so he staged it to look like the Ree had killed him. hoping to avoid future trouble. There were hardly any pure-hearted characters in the film. The closest were Bridger and Hickok. Bridger was a kind-hearted boy abandoning the dying Glass for his own safety. Though reluctantly, he had given Glass the bear claw pendant and the canteen, both symbols of goodwill. The spiral design on the canteen was like a snail shell, symbolizing a blessing and hope for Glass's survival. Hickok was a good person to Glass simply because Glass posed no threat to him. Hickok accepted Glass, who had given him a warrior's symbol of friendship, the bear claw. As for the protagonist, Glass, he wasn't exactly a good person. He became a ruthless avenger, growing colder with each step. He didn't save Elk Dog's daughter out of heroism, he just happened to be there. He had to deal with the French hunter first, and saving her was incidental. When he escaped, he didn't care about the woman's fate, but this unintended good deed spared his life later on. Glass didn't plead for Bridger, only mentioning him in passing. This indicated he still resented Bridger for abandoning him. Glass didn't protect his son and didn't appreciate Captain Henry because Henry had also abandoned him, indirectly leading to Hawk's death. Thus, in Glass's revenge plan, Captain Henry was also a target. To convince Captain Henry to pursue Fitzgerald, Glass claimed to have set a trap for Fitzgerald, but he was barely surviving himself, let alone setting traps. Knowing Fitzgerald had fled, Glass intended to use Captain Henry as bait. He sent Henry to search the open snowy area while he waited in the woods. Remember, Glass was a guide familiar with the territory. He knew that people would hide in open, highly visible places. In the end, Captain Henry became the bait, indirectly aiding Glass in injuring Fitzgerald. Glass used every tactic in his environment for revenge, proving himself as the ultimate wilderness hunter. At the film's conclusion, Glass seemed to see his wife again, watching her disappear into the distance, fading from his life completely. The film ends with Glass's confused yet determined gaze. I'm a movie lover. Subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.